He is with us to put a smile on everybody's face, and we could all use that, couldn't we? He's with us on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Our buddy, our pal, Jon Morosi is here with us. How are you, man?
Rob and Dave, I'm doing great. Wonderful to hear your voices, as always. It is a lovely time of year, and I know it's still very fresh the way that the ALCS ended, but what a great month of baseball in Seattle, and certainly I know from talking to a lot of reporters who had a chance to spend time there in your great city during the month, it was a great run and one that I think opened the eyes of a lot of people to what an amazing baseball city, what an amazing city overall Seattle is.
Yeah, hey, take us back to I want to get a full rundown on what you experienced sitting next to Bob Stelton during the playoffs. I didn't get a chance. I was on the road going to Jacksonville. Did you get injured, JP?
No, well, here's the thing. Bob is, as you know, not a small guy, okay? And so, like when he grabs your arm, I mean, I am kind of a fairly small and statured person. So when Bob would grab my arm when a big moment was happening, I'd almost have to go flag down a medic to make sure I was okay, and maybe put me in the tent, like they got in the football games. I almost had to get sent to the tent a couple times when Bob got excited. But that's just Bob represents the passion of the fans you've got in your great city, and yeah. So there were a lot of things where things that would happen in the game, and I would say I'm actually okay with that call, or I don't. There were a couple times where I don't have that big of an issue with Dan Wilson's bullpen management. It was like, really, Morosi? It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And obviously, two great series that we can. That's playoff baseball. You can second guess. I mean, 3 days ago, John Schneider was the most second guessed person in North America after the way that the Jays lost Game 3, and now he's a genius. That's how the business goes. And the Mariners, I think the way the playoffs have unfolded, the way the World Series has unfolded, I think affirms just how close they were and how close they still can be if they make the right moves this winter to getting right back to where they were this month and maybe even a step or two further. But it was a fun month, and just I got to say, I mean, the response of the fans in Seattle and the noise of the ballpark, the passion there was an incredible atmosphere that I still think about what it sounded like for the Suarez homer, and that was a pretty cool moment that I'm not going to forget.
Well, and in all seriousness, one of the coolest things outside of the Mariners being 8 outs away from the World Series was sitting next to Morosi and having him do the show with us on a number of days, and just, as I like to do, Dave, pepper him with questions and what do you think of this and what happened in this inning? Here's the spot in the order. Should they make the change here? And just John is incredibly gracious, and I could just bend his ear about baseball for hours. Unfortunately, you and Ryan Rowland-Smith had to tolerate me throughout the postseason because
that was fun, man. I mean, and it's important too, and I mean this with all sincerity. Like sometimes when you cover a team or you cover the sport from a certain angle, it's really important that when you have a panel discussion. And you guys do such a great show every week, and all the work and the thought that Mike puts into the guests and the format and everything. It's important to have different perspectives, and obviously the way I view the game is not the same way that the two of you view it, or the way that Ryan does, and that's why you have to have, and Charlie Furbush does such a great job too. You have to have the different perspectives, because there are things that will come up to your mind that you'll ask about and say, you know what, that's a really good question. And I got to follow it up and check on it with sources and see, because it's not as though any observer, no matter what network he works for, none of us have this thing figured out. So you got to come at it from that angle and say, I want to learn, I want to ask better questions, I want to figure out what the fans really have to say and what's on their mind, because that's how we all arrive at a little different understanding. And I think too, I hope one piece of the whole puzzle for fans and for everybody is the really great managers. And I think that Dan Wilson is on his way to becoming one of those and may already be that. But I think for Dan and for anybody, John Schneider, Dave Roberts, it's important to separate the process from the result. You might put a reliever in, and he was the right call, and you had the right scouting report, and his slider was the right profile against that particular left-hander, and the pitch was called. It was the right pitch to call, but he misses it by 6 inches, and he hangs it, and it's a home run, and the game's over. It was still the right decision, just not the right execution. And that's why this game is so much fun to talk about, because you can't – I love hockey too, but it's really hard to have a similar second-guessable moment in hockey. It's too random of a sport in a beautiful way. And that's why baseball – we could have this conversation. We could open up this phone conversation in February, and we could still go back and recite some of the big moments and the big steps on the positive side and the negative side for the Mariners for the month of October, and we will still remember them in 4 months. And that's just not something that really happens in other sports.
Yeah, what the point you brought up about making the right decision doesn't mean the result is always going to be the right one, and no better example of that was something Dave always brings up, and it's still hard for listeners to hear, but bringing up the Super Bowl that the Seahawks lost and the interception that was thrown by Russell Wilson in that play, and why didn't you hand it off to Marshawn Lynch? You big dummies, you don't know anything. You should have. And Dave is to his credit, dug his heels in from that day, as painful as it was, saying that was the right call. That was the right play call. Maybe you could have used different guys. Maybe you could argue personnel, but based on what they were facing, it was the right call, and nobody wants to hear it because of the result. So I totally understand what you're saying there. But I'm curious on another note in watching this series with the Blue Jays and the Dodgers, and I was reading this ESPN article where they were talking about if you remove what the Dodgers did against the Reds, where they did have some big offensive nights there, they have hit just 224 with a 372 slug in the postseason, and they are hitting 201 against the Blue Jays over 5 games and hitting just 200 without a single extra base hit with runners in scoring position. That sounds a lot like what we were talking about with the Mariners, and this lineup's dead, and look at all these other teams, and that's arguably the best lineup money can buy in baseball, and they are having the same problems that the Mariners had. So to me, it made me feel a little bit better that, all right, look at all the investments they've made and their payroll, and they're going through the same conversations and the same lack of production with runners in scoring position that the Mariners did throughout the postseason. So I guess the lesson is, you could spend the money and maybe it gets you more bites at the apple, more cracks at it, more trips to the postseason in the World Series, but it guarantees you nothing.
That's right. And I think the number one thing that stands out to me is it has never been harder to hit than it is right now. And that's the truth. The hitters that we're talking about are well-trained guys. Shohei's going to the Hall of Fame. Mookie's going to the Hall of Fame. Freddie's going to the Hall of Fame. Will Smith might go to the Hall of Fame too. And so you start talking about half your lineup is Hall of Famers, and it promises you nothing. And I've covered enough Octobers to know, and I've read enough newspapers in enough cities over the years to know that what you're describing, the lament of we just stopped hitting at the absolute wrong, worst time, that is what is said in a great many places. Maybe not every single one, but in most of them, that is the lament when the final page of the season is written. And so the Mariners are in good company. They're with basically every other great team but one every year has the same feeling. I think the part that the Mariners are going to need to confront, I believe, is twofold. Number one, you have a lot of work to do to just get back to being as good of a team as you were this year, which by definition did not end up being good enough. And by that I mean Naylor's a free agent, Suarez is a free agent. So you're basically two of your big guys in the middle of the lineup right now are not on your roster. Okay, that's number one. And
Polanco, which has a player option. Yeah.
Exactly, which I would say there's a very good chance he's going to exercise that, become a free agent. So a third of your roster, including a guy in Polanco that was, and Naylor too. I mean, when I think I mentioned last week when I was voting, and Game 7 was going on, I said if the Mariners win, Naylor's my vote to be the MVP. So he was that important to them in the LCS. And so when you look at it, you've got a lot of work to do to just get back to being that good. The second, 1B question is, okay, but do we need to pivot a little bit and get a little bit of a different type of a hitter in here? And I'm not sure exactly what kind of hitter that is when you really look at it, but the type of hitters that can perhaps string together the kind of the rallies that we're seeing from the Blue Jays, because they've done it again. They in Game 1 of the World Series, it was the same story. Here come the Blue Jays again. They're starting a rally with some of your lesser-known names. They're flipping the lineup over. Vladdy has some damage, and here they go again. And so it in some ways is difficult to replicate what the Jays have been able to do. They've got an excellent hitting coach in David Popkins. Obviously, the Mariners have that as well. But that to me is the question. You're gonna have to spend a bunch of money to get back to being as good as you were. But the other part is, but do we really have to do that? And is that really in our best interest? Or are there guys in the system? Is Emerson that close that you can start thinking about him? What can Young do next year with more playing time? That is, I think, one of the biggest questions. And I'm sure right now the Mariners' job one is knowing your own personnel, what they can do for you in 2026. Because if they have any kind of question about the readiness of the kids, they better be really aggressive in free agency. Maybe they're aggressive even in looking at the international market. The two really good players, two really good hitters, offensive players from Japan, Okamoto and Murakami. Okamoto's a righty, Murakami's a lefty. They both play first and third. So, I mean, they fit this roster. And when you consider the rich heritage of Japanese players for the Mariners, you start thinking about maybe the time is right. If you can't bring Naylor back and if you can't bring Gino back, maybe the time is right to make a really big play to get back into the Japanese player market and really change your lineup that way.
JP, if the pitching, this year would have been as good as it was last year in 2024, I mean, I have no doubt that they win the World Series. But how do you view the pitching situation this year? Because last year in all different, there was 5 or 6 categories, they were number one, and it's not like they were in the bottom third or anything this year, but it was disappointing. And I think more than anything, it was about injury. But how did you view at the end of the year the performance? Did you kind of chalk it up to, well, they just weren't healthy, or were there other problems? Because we've been talking about what they need to do for next year.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I think with the Mariners' rotation, it is still a strength of this team. There might be, maybe the Dodgers would say that they would rather have their group of 5 or 7 starters than what the Mariners have. But especially when you start factoring in who's going to be a free agent. So, yes, the Blue Jays like their mix right now, but they also have Scherzer as a free agent, and so is Bieber. And so basically half of your World Series rotation is gone when the season is over. What I think with the Mariners is they will likely be in a situation where they could trade one of their starters. This might be the time, and it's not your first choice, but trading one to get the bat you need might be an appropriate step, because as we speak right now, under contract for next year, there was a report from Adam Jude in the Times that Miller is not expected to need surgery. So if that's the case, you've got Castillo, Wu, Gilbert, Kirby, Miller, Hancock, Evans. You've got seven guys that you believe can start Major League games for you, ideally, in 2026. And there are very, very few teams that can say the same thing. And so for me, and who knows, by the way, like the way Hancock pitched out of the bullpen, I kind of like the way that looked. I think he's still ideally a starting pitcher, but that was interesting for me. I mean, to see what he could do. So if I'm the Mariners, not as a first step, if I have the budget to go after free agent position players and make a real play for a Murakami or an Okamoto, or you bring back Naylor, whatever it might be, and then as a secondary option, I think you then look at the potential of moving one of your starters. And if you do it the right way at the right time, usually that's around the winter meetings. I would say if you get much past the winter meetings, it can be hard to get full value because other teams are starting to fill their needs. If I'm Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander at the GM meetings in a couple of weeks, I am mentioning the names. I'm not shopping the players. I mean, there's always that distinction is always kind of funny to me. But I am pricing it out. What do we do? And who has some bats they can give me? And who is really desperate for the pitching that I've got? I mean, if anything, I know it wasn't perfect by the end, Dave and Bob, but I think by and large, the Mariners had this year and still have about as much pitching depth as any team does at the major league level.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see if they feel like, hey, we need to add depth, or if they think they've got a Trey Savage in their system, Kate Anderson, somebody
Right.
like that, they're going to make their way. All of a sudden that's going to be the new story. Here's a young guy in single A who can be an impact player for the big club, and that's a rarity. But we'll see. Look, I mean, Brian Wu and Bryce Miller did not spend much time in the minor leagues at all before they came up here and had an impact.
Right.
So Mariners have experienced that themselves. But I'm curious two things. Bullpen. I think we forget about that. I think that's going to be a big need going into this offseason.
Yes.
And then just second overall philosophy, if I'm wondering if the Mariners, and I was saying this the other day, John, that I hope they learned their lesson from 2022. And this is for ownership. I hope you learned. When you had the city in the palm of your hand, you had the excitement, you had the buy-in from the fans, you finally broke the curse, you got to the postseason, and they followed it up with just a dreadful offseason of A.J. Pollock and Colton Wong and that whole mess. And they were bargain shopping. I hope that is a lesson learned. I hope I don't have any idea how much money they made from being in the postseason this year, but I've got to imagine it's fairly substantial, and they looked at that. And then also looked at the story you and I talked about, we've talked about a million times, that by all accounts, the Mariners have already made their money back on what they've yet to truly invest in Shohei Ohtani, $700 million. He's deferred all of that for the most part. They haven't even paid him that, yet they've already made all of that money back and then some. So that type of investment, while painful and uncomfortable, can really do a lot for your team financially, and obviously putting them in a great position to win. What's your level of belief or faith that maybe they learned from 2022 and said, we were 8 outs away, we're not going to let this opportunity slip through our fingers again?
I think that you're spot on, that there was an opportunity missed in 22-23. They made it a lot further this time. It all felt a lot more real. And I think that that's why being a president of baseball operations or a GM is such a challenging job, because on some level you have to be dispassionate and say, okay, I have to make the right decision for the organization near term and long term, all the executive speak that we've heard for years. But the other side is the part that you spoke to, which is the emotional side. You cannot pretend like this is just any generic offseason in which you finished third in the AL West and there wasn't anything significant that happened. You got to Game 7. You had a lead late in a potential clinching game. And I remember well what it was like in Boston in the winter of 03-04 after Aaron Boone walked them off in Game 7. I was in college. I was living there, so I lived it every day. I read the paper every day. It was constant for 4 months, and they almost traded for A-Rod. That was that insane winter, and I remembered what that felt like in that city, and that's honestly, if Seattle fans should, and I'm sure do, feel that way. It was that close, and you can't. And the Red Sox at that time did not treat it like any other offseason. They went out there, they traded for Schilling, they signed Keith Folk, they made a lot of different moves. The Mariners should do a similar thing. And I think you're right on about the bullpen piece. I'll be really curious to see, guys, like someone like a Devin Williams, who a year ago was as elite as it was in this sport, and then he goes and struggles a bit in LA. He's still a free agent. He's still a really good pitcher. Different environment. I think you cannot have too many quality relievers. And Munoz has been amazing. There's certainly an argument that maybe this is a time to sort of respect his place in the core and extend him in a similar way that you have other guys. He's been that important to them, but also relievers are volatile. And you need to, I think, insulate him a little bit after all the pitches he threw. It's hard to get to the end of October and expect your closer to be just that good, just that sharp in April the next year. You get the best version out of Munoz if you bring in somebody else. And the other piece that I would say, and by the way, I mean, I'm like a Devin Williams, I think like a co-closer situation or someone that's up in that same level, that same tier, Robert Suarez with the Padres, those types of guys, why not? That was a weakness of your team. The final point about the conversation about Ohtani, you're right. Monetizing globally has never been easier to do. It's never been more important. And the Mariners, just think about this, guys. They already have all of the infrastructure to help Japanese players come to Seattle and become legends. So if you're ever going to make the pitch to Murakami and Okamoto, get number 51 on the phone, have him be a recruiter, and make that a reality for these players that are potentially coming over this wintertime.
Jon, you're the best, man. We always appreciate your insight, and we look forward to it again next week. Thanks as always.
Looking forward to it, guys. All the best. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.